the new God of might, the new gods of might, the new God of might, the new goddess of might, the new goddesses of might, the new goddess of might, the old God of might, the old gods of might, the old God of might, the old goddess of might, the old goddesses of might, the old goddess of might, the greater God of might, the greater gods of might, the greater God of might, the greater goddess of might, the greater goddesses of might, the greater goddess of might, the lesser God of might, the lesser gods of might, the lesser God of might, the lesser goddess of might, the lesser goddesses of might, the lesser goddess of might, the higher God of might, the higher gods of might, the higher God of might, the higher goddess of might, the higher goddesses of might, the higher goddess of might, the lower God of might, the lower gods of might, the lower God of might, the lower goddess of might, the lower goddesses of might, the lower goddess of might, the greater spirit of might, the greater spirits of might, the greater spirit of might, the lesser spirit of might, the lesser spirits of might, the lesser spirit of might, the higher spirit of might, the higher spirits of might, the higher spirit of might, the lower spirit of might, the lower spirits of might, the lower spirit of might, the major God of might, the major gods of might, the major God of might, the major goddess of might, the major goddesses of might, the major goddess of might, the minor God of might, the minor gods of might, the minor God of might, the minor goddess of might, the minor goddesses of might, the minor goddess of might, the superior God of might, the superior gods of might, the superior God of might, the superior goddess of might, the superior goddesses of might, the superior goddess of might, the inferior God of might, the inferior gods of might, the inferior God of might, the inferior goddess of might, the inferior goddesses of might, the inferior goddess of might, the ancestor God of might, the ancestor gods of might, the ancestor God of might, the ancestor goddess of might, the ancestor goddesses of might, the ancestor goddess of might, the ascendant God of might, the ascendant gods of might, the ascendant God of might, the ascendant goddess of might, the ascendant goddesses of might, the ascendant goddess of might, the descendant God of might, the descendant gods of might, the descendant God of might, the descendant goddess of might, the descendant goddesses of might, the descendant goddess of might, the transcendent God of might, the transcendent gods of might, the transcendent God of might, the transcendent goddess of might, the transcendent goddesses of might, the transcendent goddess of might, the past God of might, the past gods of might, the past God of might, the past goddess of might, the past goddesses of might, the past goddess of might, the present God of might, the present gods of might, the present God of might, the present goddess of might, the present goddesses of might, the present goddess of might, the future God of might, the future gods of might, the future God of might, the future goddess of might, the future goddesses of might, the future goddess of might, the authentic God of might, the authentic gods of might, the authentic God of might, the authentic goddess of might, the authentic goddesses of might, the authentic goddess of might, the synthetic God of might, the synthetic gods of might, the synthetic God of might, the synthetic goddess of might, the synthetic goddesses of might, the synthetic goddess of might, the progressive God of might, the progressive gods of might, the progressive God of might, the progressive goddess of might, the progressive goddesses of might, the progressive goddess of might, the regressive God of might, the regressive gods of might, the regressive God of might, the regressive goddess of might, the regressive goddesses of might, the regressive goddess of might, the ordinary God of might, the ordinary gods of might, the ordinary God of might, the ordinary goddess of might, the ordinary goddesses of might, the ordinary goddess of might, the extraordinary God of might, the extraordinary gods of might, the extraordinary God of might, the extraordinary goddess of might, the extraordinary goddesses of might, the extraordinary goddess of might, the static god of might, the static gods of might, the static god of might, the static goddess of might, the static goddesses of might, the static goddess of might, the dynamic god of might, the dynamic gods of might, the dynamic god of might, the dynamic goddess of might, the dynamic goddesses of might, the dynamic goddess of might, the land god of might, the land gods of might, the land god of might, the land goddess of might, the land goddesses of might, the land goddess of might, the sea god of might, the sea gods of might, the sea god of might, the sea goddess of might, the sea goddesses of might, the sea goddess of might, the sky god of might, the sky gods of might, the sky god of might, the sky goddess of might, the sky goddesses of might, the sky goddess of might, the god of might, the gods of might, the god of might, the goddess of might, the goddesses of might, the goddess of might, the half god of might, the half gods of might, the half god of might, the half goddess of might, the half goddesses of might, the half goddess of might, the vessel of might, the vessels of might, the vessel of might, the name of might, the names of might, the name of might, the person of might, the persons of might, the person of might, the persona of might, the personas of might, the persona of might, the personage of might, the personages of might, the personage of might, the personality of might, the personalities of might, the personality of might, the personification of might, the personifications of might, the personification of might, the image of might, the images of might, the image of might, the imagination of might, the imaginations of might, the imagination of might, the belief of might, the beliefs of might, the belief of might, the thought of might, the thoughts of might, the thought of might, the word of might, the words of might, the word of might, the action of might, the actions of might, the action of might, the reaction of might, the reactions of might, the reaction of might, the feeling of might, the feelings of might, the feeling of might, the situation of might, the situations of might, the situation of might, the circumstance of might, the circumstances of might, the circumstance of might, the environment of might, the environments of might, the environment of might, the relationship of might, the relationships of might, the relationship of might, the number of might, the numbers of might, the number of might, the formula of might, the formulas of might, the formula of might, the equation of might, the equations of might, the equation of might, the theory of might, the theories of might, the theory of might, the symbol of might, the symbols of might, the symbol of might, the color of might, the colors of might, the color of might, the thing of might, the things of might, the thing of might, the way of might, the ways of might, the way of might, the place of might, the places of might, the place of might, the time of might, the times of might, the time of might, the event of might, the events of might, the event of might, the result of might, the results of might, the result of might, the crown of might, the crowns of might, the crown of might, the throne of might, the thrones of might, the throne of might, the might king, the might kings, the might kingdom, the might kingdoms, the might king subject, the might king subjects, the might king's dominion, the might king's dominions, the kingdom of might, the kingdoms of might, the kingdom of might, the might queen, the might queens, the might queendom, the might queendoms, the might queen's subject, the might queen's subjects, the might queen's dominion, the might queen's dominions, the queendom of might, the queendoms of might, the queendom of might, the might prince, the might princes, the might princedom, the might princedoms, the might prince's subject, the might prince's subjects, The might prince's dominion. The might prince's dominions. The princedom of might. The princedoms of might. The princedom of might. The might princess. The might princesses. The might princess dom. The might princess doms. The might princesses subject. The might princesses subjects. The might princesses dominion. The might princesses dominions. The princess dom of might. The princess doms of might. The princess dom of might. The lord of might. The lords of might. The lord of might. The lordess of might. The lordesses of might. The lordess of might. The priest of might. The priests of might. The priest of might. The priestess of might. The priestesses of might. The priestess of might. The ritual of might. The rituals of might. The ritual of might. The shrine of might. The shrines of might. The shrine of might. The temple of might. The temples of might. The temple of might. The leader of might. The leaders of might. The leader of might. The follower of might. The followers of might. The follower of might. The natural substance of might. The natural substances of might. The natural substance of might. The supernatural substance of might. The supernatural substances of might. The supernatural substance of might. The temporal substance of might. The temporal substances of might. The temporal substance of might. The spiritual substance of might. The spiritual substances of might. The spiritual substance of might. The natural form of might. The natural forms of might. The natural form of might. The supernatural form of might. The supernatural forms of might. The supernatural form of might. The temporal form of might. The temporal forms of might. The temporal form of might. The spiritual form of might. The spiritual forms of might. The spiritual form of might. The age of might. The ages of might. The age of might. The era of might. The heiress of might. The era of might. The awakener of might. The awakeners of might. The awakener of might. The awakening of might. The awakenings of might. The awakening of might. The realm of might. The realms of might. The realm of might. The dimension of might. The dimensions of might. The dimension of might. The zone of might. The zones of might. The zone of might. The frequency of might. The frequencies of might. The frequency of might. The century of might. The centuries of might. The century of might. The millennium of might. The millenniums of might. The millennium of might. The purpose of might. The purposes of might. The purpose of might. The meaning of might. The meanings of might. The meaning of might. The culture of might. The cultures of might. The culture of might. The demonstrator of might. The demonstrators of might. The demonstrator of might. The demonstration of might. The demonstrations of might. The demonstration of might. The manifester of might. The manifestors of might. The manifester of might. The manifestation of might. The manifestations of might. The manifestation of might. The presence of might. The presences of might. The presence of might. The glow of might. The glows of might. The glow of might. The goal of might. The goals of might. The goal of might. The plan of might. The plans of might. The plan of might. The book of might. The books of might. The book of might. The philosopher of might. The philosophers of might. The philosopher of might. The philosophy of might. The philosophies of might. The philosophy of might. The releaser of might. The releasers of might. The releaser of might. The release of might. The releases of might. The release of might. The variable of might. The variables of might. The variable of might. The cause of might. The causes of might. The cause of might. The effect of might. The effects of might. The effect of might. The journey of might. The journeys of might. The journey of might. The emergence of might. The emergences of might. The emergence of might. The source of might. The sources of might. The source of might. The originator of might. The originators of might. The originator of might. The origin of might. The origins of might. the origin of might, the forefather of might, the forefathers of might, the forefather of might, the foremother of might, the foremothers of might, the foremother of might, the ancestor of might, the ancestors of might, the ancestor of might, the descendant of might, the descendants of might, the descendant of might, the lineage of might, the lineages of might, the lineage of might, the heritage of might, the heritages of might, the heritage of might, the heir of might, the heirs of might, the heir of might, the co-heir of might, the co-heirs of might, the co-heir of might, the joint heir of might, the joint heirs of might, the joint heir of might, the dynasty of might, the dynasties of might, the dynasty of might, the force of might, the forces of might, the force of might, the law of might, the laws of might, the law of might, the pact of might, the pacts of might, the pact of might, the game of might, the games of might, the game of might, the mask of might, the masks of might, the mask of might, the armor of might, the armors of might, the armor of might, the sword of might, the swords of might, the sword of might, the shield of might, the shields of might, the shield of might, the force shield of might, the force shields of might, the force shield of might, the armored force shield of might, the armored force shields of might, the armored force shield of might, the champion of might, the champions of might, the champion of might, the guardian of might, the guardians of might, the guardian of might, the defender of might, the defenders of might, the defender of might, the protector of might, the protectors of might, the protector of might, the chant of might, the chants of might, the chant of might, the shape of might, the shapes of might, the shape of might, the cube of might, the cubes of might, the cube of might, the cuboid of might, the cuboids of might, the cuboid of might, the sphere of might, the spheres of might, the sphere of might, the spheroid of might, the spheroids of might, the spheroid of might, the prism of might, the prisms of might, the prism of might, the pyramid of might, the pyramids of might, the pyramid of might, the cylinder of might, the cylinders of might, the cylinder of might, the cone of might, the cones of might, the cone of might, the triangle of might, the triangles of might, the triangle of might, the circle of might, the circles of might, the circle of might, the semicircle of might, the semicircles of might, the semicircle of might, the square of might, the squares of might, the square of might, the rectangle of might, the rectangles of might, the rectangle of might, the parallelogram of might, the parallelograms of might, the parallelogram of might, the rhombus of might, the rhombuses of might, the rhombus of might, the trapezoid of might, the trapezoids of might, the trapezoid of might, the polygon of might, the polygons of might, the polygon of might, the pentagon of might, the pentagons of might, the pentagon of might, the hexagon of might, the hexagons of might, the hexagon of might, the septagon of might, the septagons of might, the septagon of might, the octagon of might, the octagons of might, the octagon of might, the nonagon of might, the nonagons of might, the nonagon of might, the decagon of might, the decagons of might, the decagon of might, the evolution of might, the evolutions of might, the evolution of might, the revolution of might, the revolutions of might, the revolution of might, the elemental art of might, the elemental arts of might, the elemental art of might, the elemental science of might, the elemental sciences of might, the elemental science of might, the elemental principle of might, the elemental principles of might, the elemental principle of might, the elemental technology of might, the elemental technologies of might, the elemental technology of might, the low elemental art of might, the low elemental arts of might, the low elemental art of might, the low elemental science of might, the low elemental sciences of might, the low elemental science of might, the low elemental principle of might, the low elemental principles of might, the low elemental principle of might, the low elemental technology of might, the low elemental technologies of might, the low elemental technology of might, the high elemental art of might, the high elemental arts of might, the high elemental art of might, the high elemental science of might, the high elemental sciences of might, the high elemental science of might, the high elemental principle of might, the high elemental principles of might, the high elemental principle of might, the high elemental technology of might, the high elemental technologies of might, the high elemental technology of might, the agent of might, the agents of might, the agent of might, the agency of might, the agencies of might, the agency of might, the amplifier of might, the amplifiers of might, the amplifier of might, the amplification of might, the amplifications of might, the amplification of might, the enhancer of might, the enhancers of might, the enhancer of might, the enhancement of might, the enhancements of might, the enhancement of might, the magnifier of might, the magnifiers of might, the magnifier of might, the magnification of might, the magnifications of might, the magnification of might, the influencer of might, the influencers of might, the influencer of might, the influence of might, the influences of might, the influence of might, the emanator of might, the emanators of might, the emanator of might, the emanation of might, the emanations of might, the emanation of might, the converger of might, the convergers of might, the converger of might, the convergence of might, the convergences of might, the convergence of might, the aura of might, the auras of might, the aura of might, the impression of might, the impressions of might, the impression of might, the intelligence of might, the intelligences of might, the intelligence of might, the sophistication of might, the sophistications of might, the sophistication of might, the genius of might, the geniuses of might, the genius of might, the polymath of might, the polymaths of might, the polymath of might, the psychic of might, the psychics of might, the psychic of might, the knowledge of might, the knowledges of might, the knowledge of might, the understanding of might, the understandings of might, the understanding of might, the wisdom of might, the wisdoms of might, the wisdom of might, the secret of might, the secrets of might, the secret of might, the mystery of might, the mysteries of might, the mystery of might, the revelation of might, the revelations of might, the revelation of might, the tactic of might, the tactics of might, the tactic of might, the strategy of might, the strategies of might, the strategy of might, the strength of might, the strengths of might, the strength of might, the might of might, the might of might, the might of might, the power of might, the powers of might, the power of might, the authority of might, the authorities of might, the authority of might, the dominion of might, the dominions of might, the dominion of might, the rhythm of might, the rhythms of might, the rhythm of might, the melody of might, the melodies of might, the melody of might, the music of might, the musics of might, the music of might, the lyric of might, the lyrics of might, the lyric of might, the song of might, the songs of might, the song of might, the dance of might, the dances of might, the dance of might, the spirit of might, the spirits of might, the spirit of might, the soul of might, the souls of might, the soul of might, the body of might, the bodies of might, the body of might, the mark of might, the marks of might, the mark of might, the promise of might, the promises of might, the promise of might, the visionary of might, the visionaries of might, the visionary of might, the vision of might, the visions of might, the vision of might, the picture of might, the pictures of might, the picture of might, the sound of might, the sounds of might, the sound of might, the tongue of might, the tongues of might, the tongue of might, the language of might, the languages of might, the language of might, the communication of might, the communications of might, the communication of might, the people of might, the peoples of might, the people of might, the society of might, the societies of might, the society of might, the fortress of might, the fortresses of might, the fortress of might, the government of might, the governments of might, the government of might, the city of might, the cities of might, the city of might, the nation of might, the nations of might, the nation of might, the civilization of might, the civilizations of might, the civilization of might, the world of might, the worlds of might, the world of might,